My mother spent my entire childhood treating me like a human punching bag while my dad was at war. But when she blamed me for her own infidelity, I finally gave her the one thing she never expected, a reason to fear me. The copper tang of blood in my mouth always tastes like childhood. I stood in the center of the kitchen, my chest heaving, lungs burning as if I'd just run a marathon through a war zone. My mother, the woman who brought me into this world only to treat me like an unwanted debt, was staring at me. Her eyes weren't filled with the usual cold indifference or the glazed-over fog of a cheap gin bender. For the first time in 22 years, she looked terrified. I could feel the skin on my knuckles beginning to throb. I could feel the heat radiating from the left side of my face where her rings had just raked across my cheek, reopening old psychological wounds along with the physical ones. But the pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the sight of her crumpled against the laminate countertop, the tough-as-nails military wife act finally falling away to reveal the hollow, pathetic shell underneath. You hit me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a faux fragility that used to work on my father. I defended myself. I spat, the words coming out jagged and raw. "There's a difference. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? You only know how to hit people who can't hit back." I looked down at the floor. Scattered across the linoleum were the spoils of her victory, a Keurig coffee maker, a stack of my father's favorite DVDs, and a handheld vacuum. Petty. Insignificant. It was the scavenger hunt of a woman who had lost her soul and decided to settle for the kitchen appliances. To understand how we got to this kitchen floor, you have to understand the house I grew up in. It wasn't a home. It was a barracks where the commanding officer was a high-functioning alcoholic with a penchant for cruelty. My father was a career soldier, a man of honor and discipline who spent more time in the desert dust of overseas deployments than he did in his own living room. He thought he was providing for us. He thought the checks he sent home were building a future. He didn't know he was just funding a monster's playground. Mom got knocked up at 18. She didn't want a family. She wanted a paycheck and a free ride. Every time Dad's boots hit the tarmac for another tour, the mask slipped. The loving wife vanished before the transport plane was even out of local airspace. She spent her days drinking away the stress of single parenting and her nights in dive bars, bringing back a revolving door of uncles, while my younger brothers and I hid in the basement, praying the floorboards wouldn't creak. I became the shield. Every time she stumbled home, looking for someone to blame for her wasted youth, I made sure I was the one in her line of sight. I took the slaps, the belts, and the psychological warfare so my brothers could at least have a chance to sleep. I grew up fast, fueled by a simmering, black ink of resentment that I kept bottled up behind a wall of military-grade stoicism. But the bottle finally shattered 3 weeks ago. My father came home early. No fanfare, no welcome home signs, just a man who wanted to surprise his wife. Instead, he found her in our bed with a man who wasn't him, surrounded by empty bottles and the unmistakable stench of a life lived in the gutter. But the infidelity wasn't what broke him. It was the ledger I finally handed him. The years of bruises I'd documented, the photos of my brother's tear-stained faces, the bank statements showing where the deployment money really went. He kicked her out that night. No alimony, no mercy. He got her a bottom-tier apartment on the edge of town and told her if she ever touched us again, he'd forget he was a man of the law. I thought it was over. I thought we had won. But a woman like my mother doesn't go quietly into the night. She waits for the moment of least resistance. She waited for my father to head to the base to finalize his retirement paperwork, leaving me alone in the house to watch my brothers. The front door didn't just open, it groaned, as if the house itself was rejecting her presence. I walked into the hallway to find her standing there, a duffel bag in one hand and a look of pure, unadulterated malice in her eyes. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how her sons were. She just started grabbing things. "This is mine," she barked, grabbing the TV remote and the blender. "I paid for this with my years of service to this godforsaken family." "You didn't pay for anything," I said, my voice low, vibrating with a decade of suppressed rage. "Leave, Mom, before I call the cops." She laughed, a dry, hacking sound that smelled of stale cigarettes. "The cops? For taking my own property? You're pathetic. You've always been a little snitch, lurking in the corners, judging me." She began to haul her loot toward the door. She looked small, shriveled, but as she reached the threshold of the kitchen, she stopped. She turned back, her face contorting into a mask of pure spite. This was the moment she decided to twist the knife one last time. I hope you know, she sneered, her voice dripping with poison, that you are the reason your father and I are over. You and your constant whining, your pathetic need for attention. You broke this family. You should be ashamed to even look in a mirror. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the silent, terrifying sound of a dam failing. The years of, yes, ma'am, the years of taking the hits, the years of protecting my brothers, it all condensed into a single, white-hot point of clarity. No, I said, stepping toward her. I felt my height for the first time. I felt the muscle I'd built to keep her away from the kids. You and Dad split up because you were too busy drinking and sucking off every loser in the county to see your relationship falling apart. You were too busy being a whore to see what a shit mother, what a shit person you really are. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. For a second, I thought the world had stopped spinning. Then, the explosion. She moved faster than a woman her age should. She swung the heavy coffee maker she was holding, but I ducked. Before I could reset, she lunged around the counter and delivered a swift, stinging blow across my jaw. It was the same hit she'd used 1,000 times. The authority move. But I wasn't 10 years old anymore. The adrenaline hit my system like a lightning strike. As she pulled back for a second strike, her face twisted in that familiar, ugly sneer of dominance. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I stepped into her space, my fist clenching instinctively, and I threw a single, short arc punch that caught her square in the shoulder and jaw. She went down. Hard. The clatter of the falling coffee maker echoed through the house like a gunshot. She scrambled back against the cabinets, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with a shock so profound it was almost comical. She looked at me as if I had suddenly turned into a demon. You hit me, she stammered again. Get used to it, I said, my voice steady, my heart drumming a war march against my ribs. Because the world is done taking your hits. I didn't wait for her to get up. I didn't wait for her to scream or cry or try to manipulate me with her crocodile tears. I reached for the wall-mounted phone, my fingers dialing those 3 digits I should have called a decade ago. I looked her dead in the eye as the dispatcher picked up. You are so incredibly fucked, I whispered. 911. What is your emergency? The voice on the line asked. I didn't take my eyes off her. I'd like to report a domestic disturbance and a burglary in progress. The suspect is in my kitchen right now, and she's not leaving until you get here. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, I realized this wasn't just the end of a fight. It was the beginning of her ending. But as I watched her try to scramble for the door, I didn't know that the police report was only the first page of the dossier I was about to build against her. She thought the punch was the revenge. She had no idea that I was just getting started. The flashing blue and red lights danced across the kitchen walls, turning the scene of the crime into a surreal, strobe-lit nightmare. My mother was slumped against the baseboards, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting toward the back door like a trapped animal weighing its chances. Every time the sirens grew louder, her bravado chipped away. She tried to stand, her hand clutching the edge of the counter where she'd dropped the stolen goods. But I stepped forward. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just stood there, a 210-pound wall of redirected trauma, and she sank back down. The military wife was gone. The grieving victim hadn't arrived yet. Right now, she was just a thief who'd finally been caught by the person she'd spent 20 years breaking. You're going to regret this, she hissed, her voice a low, vibrating growl. Your father, he won't let you do this to me. He'll see what you did to my face. He'll see you're the monster, not me. Dad's the one who gave me the number for a private investigator, Mom. I lied. I leaned in closer, the smell of her cheap perfume and the metallic scent of my own blood mixing in the air. He knows everything. Every penny you stole from his deployment pay, every friend you had over. While he was in Kandahar, he's not coming to save you. He's coming to watch you leave in zip ties. The front door burst open. 2 officers entered, hand on their holsters, their eyes scanning the room with that practiced, icy detachment. One was older, gray at the temples. The other was a rookie who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Hands where I can see them. Both of you, the older officer barked. I immediately stepped back, palms open and raised. My mother, however, saw her opening. The moment the cops were in the room, the switch flipped. The snarling beast disappeared, replaced instantly by a sobbing, fragile woman. She wailed, a high-pitched, piercing sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, thank God," she cried, reaching out toward the rookie. "He attacked me. My own son. He's been drinking. He's unstable. Look at my face. He hit me." The rookie moved toward her, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. That was her gift, the ability to weaponize her own weakness. I felt the old familiar panic rising in my throat. This was how it always went. She'd play the victim, I'd be the troubled kid, and the truth would get buried under a layer of performative tears. But today was different. Today, I had the receipts. "Officer," I said, my voice calm, projecting the same steady authority my father used on the parade deck. "My name is the one on the 911 call. This woman is my mother, who was legally evicted from this property 3 weeks ago. She broke in while my father was at the base, and she was in the process of stealing several $100s worth of electronics and appliances when I confronted her." The older officer looked at the pile of items on the floor, the Keurig, the TV, the DVDs. Then he looked at me. "And the physical altercation?" "She swung a heavy appliance at my head," I said, pointing to the dent in the drywall where the coffee maker had nicked the paint. "When she missed, she struck me across the face. I used a single defensive strike to create distance and contacted emergency services immediately. I have the entire incident on video." The color drained from my mother's face. The sobbing stopped mid-breath. "Video," she whispered. I reached up and pointed to the small, inconspicuous black cube perched on top of the refrigerator. It was a Nest Cam my father had installed months ago after noticing missing jewelry from the master bedroom. I hadn't even thought about it until the moment she hit me, but now, it was the smoking gun. "The cloud keeps the last 24 hours, I said to the officer. "You'll see her force the back door lock. You'll hear her verbal abuse. And you'll see her strike me first." The older officer nodded to his partner. "Check the back door for signs of forced entry. And you," he looked at my mother, his voice hardening, "stand up. Turn around. You're being detained pending an investigation into burglary and domestic assault." As the handcuffs clicked shut, that beautiful, rhythmic clink, 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 I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I'd been carrying since I was 6 years old. She started screaming again, but this time it wasn't a plea for help. It was a string of profanities, so Val the rookie actually winced. She cursed my father, she cursed me, and she cursed the day I was born. "I should have left you in the trash," she shrieked as they led her toward the door. "You're nothing. You're a mistake. Actually," I called out as they pushed her into the back of the cruiser. "I'm the witness who's going to make sure you never set foot in this house again." The house went silent. The officers stayed to take my statement, and I sat at the kitchen table, the adrenaline finally fading and leaving a cold, hollow exhaustion in its wake. My jaw was throbbing, and my hand wouldn't stop shaking. I looked at the kitchen clock. My brothers would be home from their after-school program in 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes to clean up the mess, hide the broken appliances, and wipe the blood off my face so they wouldn't have to see what the monster had done this time. I was scrubbing a red smear off the linoleum when I heard a heavy tread on the porch. My father. He walked in, his uniform crisp, but his face looked like it had been carved out of old, tired stone. He looked at the empty spaces on the counters, the dent in the wall, and finally, at the bruise blooming on my face. "She came back," he said. "It wasn't a question. She's gone, Dad. The police took her. I have the case number." He didn't yell. He didn't swear. He just walked over, put a heavy hand on my shoulder, and squeezed. For a man who struggled with emotions, that squeeze said everything. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry you had to be the man today. She's going to call," Dad said, his voice gravelly. "She'll call from the station. She'll beg. She'll promise to change. She'll tell us she has nowhere else to go. Let her call," I said, looking at the phone on the wall. "But we aren't answering." But I was wrong. She didn't just call. By the next morning, I realized that my mother's nuclear option hadn't even been deployed yet. As I checked my phone, I saw dozens of notifications. She hadn't spent her one phone call on a lawyer. She'd spent it on her sister, my Aunt Sarah, the only person as toxic and manipulative as she was. And together, they had just posted a public plea on Facebook. complete with a photo of the bruise I'd given her, claiming that my father and I were military-trained abusers who had set her up to steal her home. The comments were already pouring in. My father's career, his reputation, and our safety were being dismantled in real time by a viral lie. I looked at the record, light still blinking on the kitchen camera. You want to go nuclear, Mom? I thought, my thumb hovering over the upload button. Let's see how the internet feels about the unedited version. But as I began to edit the footage, I saw something in the background of the video that I hadn't noticed during the fight. Something she had tucked into her waistband before she hit me. Something that turned a simple burglary into something much, much darker. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a coffee maker anymore. I zoomed in on the grainy footage, my breath hitching in my throat. As she had turned to strike me, her shirt had hitched up. Tucked into the small of her back wasn't a weapon, but a familiar, weathered leather pouch. My father's service medals. Specifically, his Silver Star. The one he'd earned for pulling 3 men out of a burning Humvee under heavy fire. To her, it was just a piece of metal she could hawk at a pawn shop for a few $100. To him, it was the only thing he had left that made the years of sand and blood feel like they meant something. The realization hardened the last soft part of my heart. This wasn't just a family falling apart. This was a war. Dad, I called out, my voice sounding like it was coming from miles away. He walked over, peering at the screen. I hit play and paused it right on the frame where the silver glinted against her waistband. The silence in the kitchen became absolute. I watched my father's jaw set, a vein in his temple beginning to pulse. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his car keys. Where are you going? I asked. To the station, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Stealing a coffee maker is a misdemeanor. Stealing a decorated veteran's service medals during a forced entry? That's a whole different set of sentencing guidelines. And I'm going to make sure the prosecutor sees every frame of this. While he was gone, I turned my attention to the digital fire she'd started. The Facebook post was gaining traction. Her flying monkeys, the distant cousins and bar friends who only saw her fun side, were calling for our heads. One comment read, like father, like son. Just 2 violent men ganging up on a poor woman. My finger hovered over the post button on my own account. I had the raw footage. I had the audio of her screaming that she should have left me in the trash. I had the clip of her lunging at me first. But I hesitated. If I posted this, the world would see the darkest day of my life. They'd see my mother at her most pathetic, and they'd see me, the son who finally broke. Then I thought about my brothers. They were upstairs now, playing video games, finally safe because for the first time in their lives, the monster was behind a steel door. If I didn't end this now, she'd be back in 6 months, weaponizing her victimhood to get back into this house and restart the cycle of abuse. I hit upload. I captioned it. The truth doesn't need a filter. This is the poor woman you're defending. This is the woman who hit her son for standing in the way of her theft. This is the family she claims we destroyed. The reaction was instantaneous. The internet, which had been sharpening its pitchforks for me 10 minutes ago, turned its collective rage toward her with the speed of a tidal wave. The comments shifted from abuser to monster. The flying monkeys deleted their posts and went silent as the video of her lunging at me played on thousands of screens. By the time Dad got back, his face looked lighter than I'd seen it in years. She tried to deny it, he said, sitting heavily at the table. Even with the cuffs on. She told the sergeant she was safekeeping the medals. Then the sergeant showed her the video you sent to the precinct's tip line. She stopped talking after that. What happens now? I asked. Grand larceny, breaking and entering, and domestic assault, Dad said. Because of the medals and the prior history of documented abuse I finally turned over, she's looking at significant time. The prosecutor isn't interested in a plea deal. Not after seeing how she treated you. The next few months were a blur of depositions, court dates, and the slow, methodical process of healing. We changed the locks, not because we had to, but for the symbolism of it. We repainted the kitchen, covering the dent where the coffee maker had hit the wall. The final nuclear moment didn't happen in a burst of fire or a dramatic scream. It happened in a quiet courtroom 3 months later. I sat in the back row as the judge read the sentence. My mother sat at the defense table, her hair graying, her designer clothes replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit. She looked back at me once. She didn't look sorry. She looked hateful. She mouthed the words, "I hate you." I didn't flinch. I didn't feel that old, cold knot of fear in my stomach. I just looked at her, smiled a small, sad smile, and whispered back, "I know." As she was led away to serve her 5-year sentence, I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, warm afternoon sun. My father was waiting by the truck, my 2 younger brothers jumping around in the back, arguing about what kind of pizza we were getting for dinner. They were laughing, truly laughing. I hopped into the passenger seat, and as we pulled away from the curb, I looked at my reflection in the side mirror. The bruise was long gone, replaced by a faint, almost invisible scar near my jaw. It didn't look like a mark of shame anymore. It looked like a badge. I had spent my whole life being told I was the reason for her misery. But as the prison walls disappeared in the distance, I realized I was actually the reason for our freedom. The copper taste was finally gone. For the first time in my life, all I could taste was the fresh air of a future that belonged entirely to us.